This album is special, truly special. We, I mean, just you can expect the best of the feedback out there, out the
This
list.
will be a video review.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, cool.
And maybe Frank could translate for you guys.
I'll understand it all. Mi español es magnífico.
Oh, fantastic. Well, maybe in the next chance we can talk on Spanish for all the Mexican and Latin American fans.
All we got in Spanish was the Taco Bell commercials. Yo quiero Taco Bell.
Even when the world is on my shoulders, even when the pain takes over, then the end feels closer, closer. No matter pain I feel, you know one can fail. This won't break me down.
Hello, Jamie. Thank you for being here today. Let me know how are you feeling?
Well, I'm feeling a little bit under the weather on my travels, but in good spirits. A good way to spend it, getting to hang with you, Alf. So enjoying that.
Well, I appreciate that you have taken some of your time off to be here with me and discussing your music. I know that by now the band has received great feedback on your second release. Prepare for more of that here. Recently, I have a conversation with Frank about the music, and he gave me a lot of information from his point of view about this record. And well, now is your turn. I understand that you are the man with the most responsibilities on this record, right?
I guess that's true, or at the very least, I was the most involved from the beginning to end. I think at times other people were more involved or less involved, but I think as far as from sort of pre-production through drum recording, through recording collaborators, guitars, keys, orchestra, mix, master, just as far as beginning to end of the process and all the editing of everything and putting it all together, I probably was involved directly in the most steps of it.
Right.
So in that respect, yes.
Okay.
But
okay.
At each step, I think certain people might have been more or less involved.
But well, I will get back to this later in the conversation. But for now, I usually start by asking you about your how do you remember finding music to be special for you, and your early interactions or conscious interactions with music.
How did I come to sort of love music in the way
that
I do?
Yeah.
So when I was 3, my parents identified that I had
3 years.
Well, when I was 3 years old, my parents identified I had what's perfect pitch or absolute pitch, whatever you want to call it. And around that age, they started playing me a lot of Mozart and Beethoven and Brahms and some other classical, Tchaikovsky. So as a kid at that age, 3, 4, at 4 I started piano. So there was a lot of sort of early music education, and my parents definitely played a lot of Beethoven symphonies were a mainstay, and the Magic Flute is like a Mozart opera. So sort of some grand and epic and classy music growing up. And then from when I was about 5 or 6 to 10, I mean, I still banged around on the piano, was creative, but it wasn't my main thing. When I was a little kid, I was like obsessed with whales, and then I was obsessed with birds. I think from when I was like 7 till I was like 10, I was just obsessed with birds, their songs, birds of prey, hawks and eagles. And then when I was 10, there was sort of a top 10 video countdown, not TRL, Total Request Live for MTV, but MTV's competitor VH1 had a top 10 countdown of like sort of the top pop rock songs of the week. And I didn't, my friends growing up, were listening to rock music, but I was growing up listening to classical, not really knowing any of the big hit songs of the day. And so I'd heard of some of these songs on the radio, but that was like my first time like sort of seeing rock bands. And I think there was also like a thought a little bit of when I saw somebody like playing an electric guitar, there was a thought of like, ooh, I could do that. That looks cool. And just sort of a curiosity about it. And, you know, in that realm, I very quickly became very fixated on learning as much as I could, being sort of memorizing, you know, which bands and songs were doing what on the charts or the countdowns each week, and sort of spending hours a day listening to the local radio stations and of different formats, whether it's pop, rock, adult contemporary, whatever it was at that era, alternative. And you know, over the course of a few years as a kid, my tastes evolved from sort of softer pop rock music to more alternative rock to more metal leaning stuff as metal became less and less scary. But I would say my gateway to metal, and Frank may have mentioned this album too if you asked him about his birth of his love of music. But when I was around 7th, 8th grade, I think it came out when I was in 6th or 7th grade, but I finally got the album for Christmas, I think Christmas of 8th grade. So when I was 14, the Metallica S&M album. And did Frank mention the S&M album too?
Yeah,
okay.
He did.
Yeah, predictable. I mean, Frank and I grew up with each other. I don't know if he also said that, but like I've known Frank since I was 7 and he was 6, and we were, you know, soon after that we started playing music together. I should put my phone on vibrate so we don't have a ding the whole time during our interview. No. Okay. Ruined it in the beginning, but not anymore. Okay. Let's see. Yeah. So Metallica S&M was a huge album. And I think for a lot of people, you know, who are Metallica fans, that album would have exposed them to orchestral music. I think for me, it was the other way around. And for Frank, it was the other way around, where we were more orchestra, classical people. And that was sort of our first like heavy music album that was like, oh, wow, you know, heavy music can really be sophisticated. It can have, you know, this beauty and this weight to it. And, you know, Michael Kamen's orchestrations are really imaginative. And so I think from that moment, there was like a dream born, I know for me and maybe for Frank too, of wanting to make music like that had this grandness, that had this epicness, this beauty, but this also being dynamic and able to become aggressive and heavy and rich sonically. So that was a very seminal album as far as the birth of a dream for us. And when I got it for Christmas that year, I probably, you know, the moment I came home to Connecticut from my grandma's house, probably was like, Frank, you have to hear this. So because Frank and I were, you know, that was an era when when either of us got a CD, next time we hung out with each other, we'd show each other the CD or show each other the best songs on the CD. Yeah.
Well, that's kind of the age of discovery for metal music around those years, you know. And it's interesting that you mentioned discovering or being encouraged to learn music at the age of 3, because Frank mentioned 4 years on his case. And now I fully understand why you two get along so well, because you have that background from being musical or receiving musical education before you were fully conscious on most of the things in life. And it's also funny that you get into rock music trying to fit in with your friends first. I mean, that's what I get. So you kind of make this move into being a musician and creating bands. I mean, it was on your path, maybe not rock at the beginning, maybe not metal. But it's interesting when you are a musician or a knowledgeable musician, that you can, you have other sensibilities with music, you know, and you perceive metal or rock instead of just noise and energy, also because of the possibilities with it, right? So what was your breaking point with metal, and when you say, okay, I have heard enough of it, maybe I am ready to start, digest all of what I know about it and make my own music. Because Frank mentioned Bushwhack also.
Yeah. When you say make my own music, I mean, again, when we were 7 or 8, Frank and I were banging around on his keyboard making songs. He had, his keyboard had a thing where if you played a chord, it would like automatically arpeggiate or put sort of instrumentation with a drum beat, and you could just sort of play a chord, and you could build some songs just around chord progressions, and then you could play melodies with the right hand. So we had songs like that as a kid, and that was, before we even were listening to pop and rock music. So I think we already, as soon as we heard a certain kind of music we liked, we were already trying to make it. Even before that, sometimes maybe we hadn't really delved into a genre of music, but we would play around with what we thought the style of music sounded like. So, for Frank and me growing up, making music together just for fun, not even as a band or whatever, when we were 8, 9, 10 years old, that was a normal hangout for us. So our first band together was probably when I was 12 and he was 11. This was before Bushwhack. We had a band that was had many names, but I think the name that it stayed as the longest was called Point Blank. And we went to like a summer music camp, you could call it band camp, but it's not like the band camp in the movie American Pie. It's a rock band camp. And, we recorded a few songs at this studio near Philadelphia as part of this summer music camp. And so that was our first sort of recording studio experience with Frank and me in bands together at an early age. I think, Frank was 13 and I was 14 the first time we recorded a rock song in a studio. We were younger than that the first time we recorded sort of a piano and violin song. Because if I started out on piano and Frank started out on violin, and then Frank switched to piano and I switched to guitar, and Frank very, very quickly became a better pianist than I ever was, even though he started piano 3 years later than me. And if Frank ever switched to guitar now as an adult, if you gave Frank a year to play guitar, he'd be a better guitar player than me. So Frank would naturally be better. And if you give Ryan any of these instruments, he'd be better than us in a month.
Okay. So there's a special bond between the band because you go back to many years, and I want to say a sacred bond in Earthside between these members. And the thing about Bushwhack, and I mentioned this to Frank, is that it is necessary for musicians to mess with many ideas from a broad spectrum of music, because Earthside, when first came out, it was like anything I have heard before, very unique, but not kind of forceful within all of the elements, kind of organic and natural. And I guess that was the reason, because the reason it became so praised and celebrated around the globe. Between, first mainly in prog fans, but it's beautiful and it's been regarded as one of the best debuts of the last 10 years, and I agree with that sentiment. So in the spirit of that comment, having a cult-like base of aficionados waiting for your second release, let's talk about the expectations and what that does for a band, or if that's a thing Earthside has somehow channeled in the process of making this second album.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot there. First, what you talk about as far as sort of maybe like a natural integration of different sounds while being more subtle. I think when you talk about Bushwhack earlier, I think Bushwhack was more overt in sort of pulling all these different influences, and I think part of why we switched and we sort of started anew as Earthside, in addition to having a different bass player. I think it was a recognition that we had found what the ethos and the emotions kind of we wanted to evoke with our sound, and I think we had matured as composers and writers in a way that, I think with the Earthside debut, we had kind of just gotten the grasp, that hang of that more subtle approach about not being subtle, because it's definitely fairly in your face about the epicness and intensity, but more subtle as far as pulling from influences, I think. Where, you know, Bushwhack would be like, here's the mariachi part, here's the ragtime part, here's the, I think bands like Haken and Dream Theater can kind of do things like that, where they, they'll more shove it in your face, the influence they're pulling from. And I think that's how we were with Bushwhack. And I think with Earthside, we wanted to move away from that and move towards something that was more subtle in that dynamic. And then when you talk about sort of the expectation going into our second album,
yeah,
I mean, I think for the most part, it was expectations we had for it ourselves, what we wanted it to be. And a lot of it was, born out of, while A Dream in Static was well received, there are just certain things about it that just weren't quite how we wanted it, like where when we set out to record A Dream in Static, there was a sound we wanted, and maybe people who love the album wouldn't understand why we feel this way, but there's a few things that are just like, it's not quite how we wanted that to feel, or quite how we wanted that to sound. That's not quite the drum sound we wanted. That's not quite the guitar sound we wanted. Or, if I had this decision to do over again. And you're going to have that every album. You can't make anything, if you chase perfection endlessly, you're never going to reach it. That said, we took 8 years with this album, in part because we really did try.
Okay.
For better or for worse, we really were like, okay, instead of just calling this done or letting it go, we didn't easily let things go on this upcoming album. And some of it may be due to fan expectation. I think, especially the longer the album took, the more the album had to live up to the wait. And then it became a vicious cycle, because then it just takes even longer still. Because then you're really like, well, in order to justify it taking 5 years, we really have to make sure we make this perfect. Well, okay, and then trying to make it perfect enough to live up to 5 years, it takes 8 years. So, I think that was part of it. But I think more than anything, it was us chasing
perfection.
And not perfection as far as objective perfection. Perfection as in, this is how we hear it in our heads. This is how we imagine it sounding. And we want you to be able to hear it the way we hear it, or we wanted to hear it. So there's no perfect, in the sense that with art, there's no necessarily right or wrong. But when you're a composer or producer, there's the sound that you want to create. And at times you don't get that exact sound. So then the question is, how much do you tinker with it till it does sound the way you want it to feel the way you want it to? And I'd say on this album, by taking the process we did, we got pretty damn close. I mean, there's still maybe a few things I could point to that I was like, we had more time. I wish we could have gotten this one snare hit in this one song to sound a little bit fuller, or, this one key moment here I wish hit a little bit bigger in the mastering, or whatever it might be. But I think this record is, for how obsessive we are in getting things to be exactly how we want them, I would say this album came much closer to that than our first record, at a level at which I do think we'll be able to let go of some of those things on our third record, that I don't think we'll need to take another 8 years to make an album, because not because of a perfection or objectively good kind of thing. It's just we've
being
now
more confident.
Now, I don't know if it's even confident. I mean, maybe there's some of that, but it's more like A Dream in Static came close to checking the box we wanted to check. And then I think on Let the Truth Speak, we did check the box, as far as this is an album that feels the way we want it to feel, that sounds the way we want it to sound. We've done it. And that doesn't mean we don't want future albums to sound good, but as far as whatever life mission we had to kind of create an album that felt a certain way, that I think A Dream in Static really was like a mission set out to achieve that. And we got close, but we didn't quite hit it. So I think that drove us crazy. Like, we put all that in and we still didn't get it quite how we want it. We're not gonna go through all that again and feel that way again. And so yeah, I think we just spent years just obsessing over every detail and every and Frank probably talked about this as well, but each song on Let the Truth Speak has its own kind of instrumentation where it sort of becomes its own unique production. And so each song kind of had to be exactly how we wanted it in that style. And each song had its own demands as far as the recording process, then in the mixing process, what you wanted emphasized. You couldn't just kind of copy stock settings from one and copy it across the album. For the most part. So yeah, I think there was a lot that went into it, but in doing that, yeah, I do think that we have achieved the thing we set out to achieve on A Dream in Static, and then set out again to kind of check off on this album. I think we did check it off this time for ourselves. And so I think what's exciting about that is now on the third album, I think we can just kind of go where the inspiration takes us and not feel like we're having to chase something we didn't accomplish, and therefore I don't think we'll be driven as crazy. I think we really were. Okay. I think we tortured ourselves the last 8 years trying to make sure we never never have that feeling again of it's not exactly, oh man, and so and we prioritized healing that feeling over the direction of our professional career, as far as, it's not, people would not recommend taking 8 years after your debut album to release a sophomore album. It's one thing if you're Tool and you already have 4 huge albums and you're one of the biggest bands in your genre in the world, you can get away with taking a decade on an album because people will be there. Having only put out 1 album, we have to live the rest of our lives knowing we missed an opportunity to capitalize on the momentum we had with that debut from a professional standpoint. And that's very frustrating. It's upsetting. I can be mad at myself for it. I can be mad at my bandmates for it. I don't know how my bandmates feel exactly, but there are moments where, that really feels like, a regret. Like, well, what if we had been able to just release an album 2 or 3 years after A Dream in Static and harness that momentum? But we're not living in that world. And so I think one thing I'll say is when we released the song Let the Truth Speak, it was because of the Dan Tompkins collaboration, but also I think because of the scope of that song, it really felt like we reawoke a lot of the fans of the A Dream in Static album at that moment.
Yeah.
And I'm hopeful that when we release this album, it will reawaken a certain momentum. But we know we have to kind of not build from scratch, but we really have to recreate a momentum surge from something that's been dormant, and that's hard to do. And then once we have it, we can't take another 8 years,
Right.
And I don't think we'll need to, because I think, again, we crossed off the thing we set out to. So now we can just kind of go forth and make the record we feel inspired to make the record that makes sense to make for what I was saying is, we sacrificed our careers in certain ways to chase this exactly how we wanted this obsession. We also, sacrificed our personal lives, our relationships. There's a lot of things that I think really suffered, our mental health, our physical health at times. I think all these things suffered in certain ways because we were so fixated on making this album how we wanted it to sound.
Yeah, well, I want to mention that I didn't listen to the song with Dan Tompkins as a single. I didn't want to. I preferred to wait for the full experience, and it paid off. And I understand that you and the band prioritize the vision and the art instead of, being relevant and grow as a band. And this is something that we touch with Frank. How do you measure success as a musician? Is either the vision, the art, or the famous aspects, or being more having more financial success, maybe more exposure. And he mentioned that, for example, the Carnival or Tool, besides those bands, there are many bands that took the time and the effort to make something beyond being a product of music, beyond grow in terms of exposure again. And if I understand correctly what you mentioned, there are things in doing things the way Earthside does that you learn things that you can unlearn for future albums, and this is what you are now, right? Because of being so obsessive and because of being having so much care for the art and for the vision, that you know that in the future it won't take as much time, correct?
I think if we go out trying to achieve the same sound, even if we learn how to do certain things, I think if we have the same mentality on our next album as we had on the second one, I wouldn't promise anything. Because again, when you get fixated on satisfying compulsions and obsessions, and you're willing to sacrifice anything to fulfill them, including your own mental health and your own feeling of productivity and moving forward, then it's all bets are off, So I really think it is important, that we draw a line in the sand and say, okay, we're really proud of what we just created, the album that people are going to hear, and we can never make a record like that again. Not that it's nothing critical of the record. I think we'll all feel for the rest of our lives that this is a special album.
Right.
But knowing what it took to get it, and to get it where we wanted it. It could be that if we didn't do all those things to get it where we wanted it, people would still respond the same way they're going to respond to the album, or at least in a lot of ways. So I think from a process standpoint, I think there has to be a bit more spontaneity and a bit more allowing ourselves to do things that feel fun, trust ourselves as musicians to make something that's special and interesting without romanticizing our own suffering.
Right.
And because I think there is this romanticization among artists as like the tortured artists.
Right.
And so I think it's really important that we, whatever level we indulged that on Let the Truth Speak, and to a degree on A Dream and Static, but more so on Let the Truth Speak, that we don't indulge that again, and we find out what kind of record can we make when we don't. Can we make something special with a new set of parameters and a new set of challenges that give us a more inspiring and an experience that feels like it's moving forward rather than stuck. And what is that going to be like? And it's interesting to be talking about what it's going to be like making the next record when we haven't even released the second one.
Right.
But though I don't know by the time this interview airs, if the interview will come out after the album has been released, people will have heard it at that point. But yeah, I just know, I know what it took for each of us to get this record, and would not recommend. So,
it's not for everyone.
No, and it's not for us. It was for us this time. I don't think it should have been, but it was. So what will be, or what we did, we did. And going forward, and maybe if we go with this more sane approach on our next record, people will hear it and be like, Earthside's better when they torture themselves. But at least we'll know. At least we'll know. We need to try one where we don't torture ourselves and see if the suffering is the stuff. If it's like, if we need to suffer to create something special, then we'll return to the suffering. We'll go back to our roots, so to speak. The dreaded band going back to their roots. For us, going back to our roots will be, all right, let's indulge torturing ourselves some more.
And you won't know until you try that. But I know, or at least I know that for Frank, he knows this album is something special. Maybe you agree with that, and I do agree that this album is special. So far, I don't think anyone that has published a review fully understands the album. It's more a reaction a positive reaction because it just comes so natural when you listen to this experience. It's I'm out of words, honestly, and I'm not just saying this. That one is simply beautiful. It's different because it's never about displaying complexity or the apparent skills of one instrument in particular. I think it's more about the magic of the full ensemble. One thing I noticed when listening to this record is that it erases the lines in between the parts. I don't appreciate the music here in terms of one instrument over another. You know, there are no solos. So you don't really know when one part began and when another one ends. And also, I think this music sounds so fragile in a way that all the experience could fail and crumble in the absence of any of these parts. And I can hear the drums, the guitar, and realize that it's not complex, it's simple, the delivery. But again, it feels with so much depth that is you don't find music like this nowadays. So what can you tell me about the process to conceptualize these nuances into the music?
Well, really quickly, I will say Ben's drum parts can be complex sometimes, but
Yeah.
but yeah, his drums can be, and sometimes the bass. But yeah, especially my guitar parts. I'm not, a virtuosic guitar player, so I play, within my own limitations. But I think with that comes a priority and a focus on emotion and on the bigger picture of the composition. And I think with the horizontal, if you think of music as sort of, there's a vertical axis of sort of what's happening in one given moment, and horizontal as far as across time. The horizontal, is not as much about showcasing certain instruments. I think the horizontal is about a journey, and the vertical is about sort of the texture and the feeling in just lingering in a specific moment. And so when we compose music, I think it's about those different tableaus, those experiences, and those feelings in that specific moment, and the dynamics of how that sort of morphs over time. And I think the feeling that certain songs kind of almost, there's like an inexorable fate. I don't know if that's a word that has a direct translation in Spanish, but this idea that it couldn't have happened any other way. There was sort of this journey that it was fated to go on, and this is how it had to play out. And I think on this, especially on the True Speak album, that's something we're proud of, as far as the beginning to end experience of a song is something we prioritize, as far as everything is intentional. The transitions are intentional, the climaxes are intentional, the building to a fake out climax, quieting down, and then building to a much bigger climax. Each of those is thought out, but it's thought out based on gut feeling. It's not calculated. It's it's intuitive. So it's thoughtfully done, but without sort of over analyzing it. And
Okay.
But I think it's something we spent a good amount of time really making sure felt right, and really listening back to our songs, listening back to ourselves in the demoing phase, like to really maximize those emotional impacts of a beginning to end experience, and also maximize the key moments. Having, if there's a moment you really want to tug on the heartstrings and feel anguish and painful, that you're maximizing that. If you want something to be a holy fuck moment, that you're doing everything in your power to dramatize that impact. So yeah, I'd say that's, I think, a big part of when we're writing. It's not necessarily how our ideas are generated, but once we have the ideas that we're working with, how we then have things unfold in a beginning to end timeline.
even though you say is driven by gut feeling, you could say this also happened in between jam sessions, that you find the groove or the energy of it. That also happened here.
Depending on the song, but absolutely for some of the songs. I mean, something that was true with both albums is like about half the songs were written in jam sessions together, and
Okay.
then refined in demoing and pre-production, and then in the actual production. And then some of the songs are, one person, on Logic Pro in their bedroom, just creating something where there is no jamming. So for instance, a song like All We Knew and Ever Loved, that's not jammed. That's Frank, demoing it in his room, feeling whatever he was feeling in that moment and creating something. And then him giving us a demo of that, us giving feedback, and then him, changing some things based on our feedback. But that's the extent to which there's a jam on a song like that. The jamming is our reactions to what he's creating. Or Ben's song The Lesser Evil, same idea as far as he's creating things, but then there's things that we're all reacting to in it. On a Dream and Static album, when I wrote Mob Mentality, it was again something where I wrote it myself, but my bandmates reacted to certain things in the demoing and pre-production process that then changed where it was headed. Whereas songs like Let the Truth Speak, A Dream and Static, The Closest I've Come, We Who Lament, trying to think what else, on Watching the Earth Sink on the new album, songs like that are more, built out of rehearsal, sort of jam sessions in a rehearsal setting.
I want to try a two-part question next, because Frank mentioned that he is called the closer in the band.
The closer.
This is the second time one of his composition is end up on the end. So for one, how do you choose this song to be the end? I mean, in a way that you construct all of the order of the track list, and this happened before having the vocals in the songs, because I mean, the music can be measured just in terms of the instrumentation, the cinematic flow of it, but also the vocalists, I think take the music to another level. So there's also that part of the process of finding the right voices for each song, the way that the vision is fully accomplished inside your head, right? So maybe I'm overthinking this question, but how do you make the model of Earthside sustainable? Or is perhaps, if not pain or torture, the secret recipe, the vocals?
So is the first part of your question about the closing track part?
Yeah.
Okay. I think this is one I have to take part by part.
Sorry for that.
With the closing track, I mean, we only have 2 albums, so it's we have the smallest number of albums where you could say there's a plurality of times that it's always the case. So, it's the same idea that both albums, the track that has Daniel Tompkins singing on it is the track that's the title of the album, which, that's coincidence that the song A Dream and Static on the album A Dream and Static features Dan, and that the song Let the Truth Speak on the album Let the Truth Speak features Dan. There might be something to it, but we didn't set out to do that.
Okay.
I don't know if it will for all of time be the case that every album we ever do, Frank has to be the person who's the closing track. I do think Frank's sensibilities are intense, and I think he can feel things pretty strongly, and at his writing can feel a little doomier and darker than maybe the rest of us in certain ways. That, if you're not trying to have some happy, triumphant ending, but you want something that feels like a big exclamation point on it, I think it just naturally happens where Frank's writing sensibilities can lend themselves to being the closing track. I think while both the Dream and Static and Let the Truth Speak are on very different topics, I think they both sort of leave the listener in a not the most necessarily optimistic place with respect to the plot line, or I mean, it's not like a concept album, but as far as the themes and where things are headed. And yeah, I think both Contemplation of the Beautiful and All We Knew and Never Loved sort of leave the listener in that sort of damn, what just happened kind of feeling. That said, I think we're a band that writes closing tracks, meaning I think a lot of our songs would be closing tracks on a lot of other bands' albums.
Yeah.
We don't write a lot of opening tracks. We don't write a lot of track 2s or track 3s. It's just a collection of closers, and it's just which one's the closiest closer. So, the song Let the Truth Speak very easily could have been the closing track on the album. I mean, that ending is intense as can be.
I think that is the closer for me, and the following is like to make it more epic even.
Yeah, I think in some ways Let the Truth Speak is the closer, and then All We Knew and Ever Loved almost functions like an aftermath.
Yeah.
It's like Let the Truth Speak ending is the end, and then All We Knew and Ever Loved is kind of like the epilogue of and this is where things are left. Now that the devastation of Let the Truth Speak happened, this is what you're left with. Whereas I think, Contemplation of the Beautiful kind of serves both roles, where it has to Let the Truth Speak plus All We Knew and Ever Loved kind of combined. So yeah, I almost might say that trio of Vespers, Let the Truth Speak, All We Knew and Ever Loved, which I believe is like, the final side of a double vinyl, that whole thing kind of serves as like one big closer in some ways.
By the time you released this as a single, you already knew this was the closer track on the album.
Yeah, with All We Knew and Ever Loved. Yeah,
and it's not very, it's different than about release the last song as a first single.
Yeah. Maybe, again, when we talk about things that wouldn't recommend, I don't know if it's necessarily a good idea, because it is kind of like giving away the ending on some level. But I also think the album is so much that I almost wonder if on some levels it's kind to the listener to have some things at the end that they've already heard before, because they already will have gone through a lot. And so to have something that they've now heard before, if they've listened to the singles, after having gone through, the whole album as a whole is almost 80 minutes of music. So, and some of these songs are each individually like a lot to take in. So it's kind of like a movie that
but
how it ends, but how you get there is the question.
Okay, I asked you about finding the vocalists, the voices, but maybe that's too broad, because you received thousands of comments in your publication, I remember. So let's talk about one song in particular for now. I want to ask you about The Lesser Evil, because for me this song feels different in the way you deliver the guitar parts. Maybe are more at the front of the song. And the way the groove is like more restrained, more rigid. I don't know if that's a correct assumption of me. But on the other hand, you have like this counterpart of having this soul vocalist, Larry Braggs. And right. it's kind of a risk there. But I don't know if you, having this song, the music first, did you feel like you needed something to counterpart to make this experiment function?
So the Lesser Evil, Lesser Evil is, as I alluded to earlier, is our drummer Ben. That's his sort of baby on the album.
Okay.
The Lesser Evil is unique in a lot of ways, but one specific way it's unique is it's probably the only song Earthside has ever written where we had the vocalist in mind before it was written.
Okay.
And so basically, Ben wrote the song with Larry Braggs as the vocalist in mind from the get-go.
Wow.
And then we just had to hope and pray that we actually got him. You know, he said yes. Because if we didn't, I don't know
big
who
risk
would have
there.
sung that. Yeah, because I think this. And also, if you listen to the song with sort of the demo to what it became when his vocals were on it, I think that was a necessary ingredient. Because and you know, Ben himself is a very good singer, but yeah, listening to the song with Ben's demo vocals versus having someone like Larry that Ben imagined being a singer of it, that's where you really got to see Ben's imagination for it come to life. You know, as far as the guitars being different on that song, part of it is it's not my guitar writing. You know, that's
okay.
I'm not very. There are some things in that song that are my guitar writing, but a lot of what you're reacting to, that sort of more sort of angular, rhythmic, kind of jagged kind of stuff, you know, that it was written by Ben. Some of those 8-string guitar parts were played by a guy in Sweden named Henrik Gennert, who, you know, he plays with Fredrik Thordendal from Meshuggah. He's kind of more from that school.
Okay.
So Henrik is also who played the solo on the song The Ungrounding on the A Dream in Static album. So when Earthside needs virtuosic guitars that are way more virtuosic than I can play, Henrik's generally been our go-to guy. So I'm definitely more a composer than a guitar player. So I don't take pride in being one of the best guitar players in progressive music. I think I can be one of the more interesting writers in progressive music as a guitar player. But yeah, it's kind of like when Steven Wilson wants something really interesting on guitar or drums or whatever instrument, you know, he has a person. Wow, I'm blanking on the name of the guitar player who was guitarist on Steven Wilson's solo albums. Oh my God. I want to look it up. This is good podcasting, but good interview. Let's see. Steven Wilson, Raven, guitarist. Guthrie Govan. There we go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so like Guthrie Govan is like one of the greatest guitar players on earth, probably. So, you know, it's a similar idea as far as I'm more guitar at the Steven Wilson level and more songwriter composition, kind of like Steven Wilson. And Henrik Gennert is more a remarkable guitar player. He doesn't sound like Guthrie. He has his own style. It's more in that gent style and more in the rhythmic and you know, Meshuggah-esque style, but also sort of more like mellow death kind of soloing. When he plays more solos, he can be very, very legato style playing. So, you know, those are all things that aren't in my toolbox as a player. So, yeah,
Okay.
The Lesser Evil, as far as what you hear differently on the guitars, to the extent that there's 8-string guitars, that's Henrik playing, that's Ben's writing, with Henrik kind of adding his own flair to it. So
It's maybe the more bombastic song of
that's
the album.
word. That's the word I would use. That is the word I use. I refer to The Lesser Evil as the most bombastic song on the album. Yeah.
Okay, now a second song I want to focus is on Tyranny.
Tyranny, yeah.
Tyranny. That vocalist is, I don't know how you felt when you hear them prior to having them on the song. But I mentioned this also to Frank because I think Contemplation of the Beautiful is my favorite song from A Dream in Static, and that song showed me what I expected on the future release in terms of receiving the emotion, and I think that this song fully gives me that to me. So this song goes to that scream of tyranny and some part, and I'm fully served. And after that point, all of the album is a gift, an extra gift, because I received what I wanted. And I don't know if you wrote the lyrics, or I don't know why you choose him for this song in particular.
Yeah, so I mean, you said a lot of things that I think we felt too, and that I agree with. So you know, when we released A Dream in Static, we didn't lead with Contemplation of the Beautiful. We never played it live. It wasn't one of the singles. You know, it's not a song with one of the more well-known vocalists. But I think as time went on from the time that A Dream in Static was released, both for us within the band and I think for fans of the band and the album, I think Contemplation of the Beautiful became a song that really took on a meaning for a lot of people. And when we set out to do this Let the Truth Speak album, I think emotionally Contemplation of the Beautiful was a song that informed. I don't think we wrote a song that sounds like Contemplation of the Beautiful, but I think how that song felt in certain ways informed some of the creative decisions we made on Let the Truth Speak. So much so, you know, we did reach out to Eric Zerlinger about singing on more than one song on Let the Truth Speak. But, you know, sometimes it's about where a person is in their life at a given time. So,
yeah,
you know, but we feel that what Eric contributed to that song was very special, and we're very drawn to that vocal style where there's a screaming aspect to it, but it's all with pitch, with notes, and it's all about emotion rather than about heaviness. It's not screaming to show how tough you are or how brutal you are. It's a scream to just feel
in the chest. You know, I feel it too.
And so, I think that when somebody screams with a note where it's like it's part of the melody, where they're screaming a certain pitch, you can hear that is the right note. Where if somebody wasn't screaming, it would still be the note you'd want them singing at that moment. I think that can add something. Like, you know, bands like Textures and Devin Townsend, Dan Tompkins from Tesseract, you know, these are artists I think who kind of can do that really well. As far as that, Bjorn Strid from Soilwork also can, you know, sort of scream a note. So anyway, when you alluded to that guest vocalist recommendation post I made in 2020, you know, after having talked to Eric and Eric having not been at the sort of right, not having it really make sense for him to be on this record with where he was at, you know, discovering Pritam Adhikari as a recommendation from that guest vocalist post that, you know, had over 1,000 comments on it. And, you know, I went through 4 to 6 to 10, you know, depending on the day, different recommendations. I remember when I first heard him, and Alf, have you listened to any of Pritam and his own band, Arlan?
No, I discovered him here.
Okay, well, I meant like since then, since discovering him, have you?
No.
When our interview's over, I'll send you a link. But
thank you.
The song we discovered him on is a song called Vidro, which is I think that means rebellion in Hindi. I think I have that right. And the lyrics in Arlan songs are all in Hindi, which is probably the most common language in India. So they're like an Indian metalcore, like progressive ambient-ish metalcore band, Arlan. But yeah, when I heard Pritam in the song Vidro on his band Arlan, you know, it starts off with him sort of more metal screaming, kind of like the verses that you would expect in like a metalcore band. You know, a lot of metalcore bands in the verses, it's just sort of growling, screaming. But yeah, when it gets to the chorus of that song, it opens up and he's mostly singing, but there's those like high screams that are pitched, kind of like I was describing, with all that reverb and all that openness. And once I heard him do that, I then thought to myself, oh man, how would that, how would that moment feel with him doing it in that vocal style? And so, you know, I started talking to Pritam, and it wasn't right away that we decided him for the song, because we weren't 100% sure how some of the quieter parts would work with his voice. We knew that, like, that moment you talked about, you know, we knew that was gonna be just right in his wheelhouse.
Okay.
But, you know, some of the quieter parts earlier in the song, you know, we had to think about, get to know his voice more, hear more of him singing, have him try it a little bit, because we hadn't heard him sing in English. We'd only heard him sing in Hindi. And then, you know, in Tyranny, at the very end of the song, we knew we wanted more of that kind of vocal style again in the outro, but we hadn't written any of the vocal parts. We'd written the vocals for the rest of the song, but we hadn't for the ending. And so I invited Pritam to sing in his own native language, which is not Hindi. It's a language called Bengali. And so in his own band, Arlan, he does not sing in Bengali. He sings in Hindi. So it's unique and very personal for him that on our song, he's singing in English for the most part, but then at the very end, he wrote his own lyrics and melody for the whole outro, in his native Bengali, which I think is very meaningful. And as far as collaborators we've worked with, I think Pritam is very, very invested in this album. He's somebody who messages me almost every day, asks how I'm doing. He always wants to know what's the latest with the album. If you ever want to talk to Pritam for an interview, he'll talk to you for sure. He's
I'm down. Yeah, definitely.
So, yeah, he's a sweetheart of a guy. He feels things. Pritam and Frank are both people who feel things very intensely and deeply. So even though Tyranny was, I won't say I wrote the whole song, but I wrote most of the song. And actually, Frank didn't write any of Tyranny. It was me writing most of it with a little bit of Ben, a little bit of Ryan, and a little bit of Pritam doing the writing on Tyranny. I do think it's a song where, despite that being the case, I think because I grew up with Frank, I think Tyranny has a lot of me channeling Frank in those moments, like the It's Tyranny moment.
Okay.
Where I think it's Frank's influence on my writing, because I think Frank and I have influenced each other so much. I think Frank and I have influenced Ben, because Ben, was a drummer who wasn't writing his own songs until he started being bandmates with us. So in a lot of ways, the three of us especially are among each other's greatest musical influences, as far as how we push each other and how our writing has evolved because of listening to what each other creates, or what we've been exposed to through each other. So yeah, I think the way that Tyranny reminds you of Contemplation of the Beautiful, even though Frank wrote all of Contemplation of the Beautiful and none of Tyranny, I think it's Pritam's sort of emotion has something similar to it, that what Eric brings. And then I think I channeled some of that Frank Contemplation of the Beautiful mood in certain moments in Tyranny.
Okay, I could ask you about each song, but let's not do that. Okay, so when this is a band, or Earthside being a band that with each member having multiple roles and different energies, or how do you ensemble all of that into the track list, the order, the experience? How was that for you?
Like, how, with all these songs, how did we choose the order that they were in?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I think But What If We're Wrong was a song that when I wrote it, I think I imagined it as an opener. I heard that sort of opening bell thing as the way an album would start and kind of grow out of that. And my bandmates agreed. I think We Who Lament also we heard it as that song feeling like an awakening. So it also feels kind of like an opener, as how it kind of blooms out of that drum pattern. So But What If We're Wrong is kind of the instrumental opener, and then But What If We're Wrong is the instrumental opener, and then We Who Lament is kind of the vocal opener that follows it. Yeah. I think the track list, I mean, again, All We Knew and Ever Loved, I think felt just like there's a finality to it. It felt like the closer, and Let the Truth Speak, that outro felt like the climax of the album. So I think those aspects all kind of cemented themselves where they were. The rest, it's been so long, because I think even though we didn't finish this album till earlier this year, even in like demo form, I think this was pretty much the track list.
Okay.
From like before we even started recording. The only difference is the song Pattern of Rebirth did not exist. We started Pattern of Rebirth as like a pandemic project. So it would have, before this, gone from Tyranny into Watching Earthside. There was no Pattern of Rebirth. And then Vespers did not exist. Vespers, it was originally Denial's aria, into Let the Truth Speak. There was no Vespers as a transition. So Pattern of Rebirth and Vespers were kind of both inserted into the track list where they are. Vespers kind of was designed to be an intro to Let the Truth Speak. Pattern, it was a question of finding a place for it where it fit into the flow of things. And I think we found that place pretty well. But
definitely goes well after Tyranny. I think it has a darker, somber aura, even though it's not the heaviest song. It complements quite well. Okay, maybe let's move on to another aspect of this album.
I have one more thing of the track. One more thing of the track list.
Yeah.
Watching the Earth Sync also feels like a closer in its own way. So we kind of set it up to be kind of the closer of the first half.
Right.
Like when you're ending, if you had it as a vinyl, the end of that first record is Watching the Earth Sync, and I think
the
Lesser Evil opening the second part of the record just kind of as a whomp, and we're in. Kind of.
Yeah. Yes. You have also a special vocalist here, Chachenko. How did you find the right use for his voice? Because he's so different.
Yeah, and this is a good segue. So first of all, get my pronunciation. I practiced it. So it's Gennady Tkachenko Papish.
Okay.
Gennady Tkachenko Papish.
Gennady
I pronounce it better if I wasn't slightly. Yeah, and so I mean, yeah, he was another vocalist we discovered through on my Jamie Earthside Facebook that vocalist post. The vocalists we discovered through that were Pritam Adhikari, Ketra Johnson, Ketra, and then looks like Ketura, but she pronounces it Ketra, and then Gennady Tkachenko Papish was also from that post, and then AJ Channer from Fire from the Gods, who's on Pattern of Rebirth, we knew about, but that post, somebody recommending him in the comments on that post reminded us, that would be really cool. Mm-hmm. So a good amount of a good number of the collaborators we ultimately worked with on this record came from recommendations from that post. So when we discovered Gennady, so I mean he's on 2 songs, but mainly he's on Let the Truth Speak. As far as his role with Daniel Tompkins, we actually recorded his vocals before we recorded Daniel. So we had some places in mind where we knew we might want Daniel to sing and Let the Truth Speak, but most of the vocals that Dan sings hadn't been written yet. So Gennady, improvised to the instrumental, and then we kind of figured out what moments of magic in his improvisation fit with the sort of dynamic of the music, and only then did we really work on what Dan was going to sing, with us writing some of Dan's vocals and Dan writing some of his own vocal parts. But that was all with the Gennady track already in mind for most of it. So he kind of almost was woven in as this additional orchestral instrument. It's kind of like the strings and Gennady combined together to be this sort of cinematic voices of the song, and then like Dan as the flourishes of the song. Yeah. And something to kind of heighten the emotions, to create a sound world for the song. I think the strings and Gennady sort of combine to.
I actually sometimes don't know when is him and when are the orchestrations. Kind of maybe I don't have the right ear for it, but I mean the song is special. Nothing left to say.
At some point, I think we gotta release like a mix that has Gennady's voice just like way up in the mix, so people can hear all the nuances of what he's doing, and people can hear isolated. Oh, okay, that's Gennady there. I thought that was Dan, or that's Gennady there. I thought that was keyboard. Just so people can really hear it out front, what he's doing. I think would be really cool. It's something I want to do. Because I think in the final mix and master, Gennady's maybe a little bit quieter in Let the Truth Speak than we wanted him to be. But it also, when we tried to turn him up, it made it so the song just didn't sound as good. So the best thing for the song overall sonically, as far as how it was approached, was to have him at that level. But I think one of the things we wish is that people could hear him more at the forefront in certain moments, and that it just so people could really get a sense of, wow, that's really cool what he's doing there. Or, oh, I listened to that song 20 times, but I never noticed that moment that he does this little flourish. Whoa, that, I felt it sort of unconsciously, but never really paid attention to it. So I think that would be a common experience for a listener to that song, I imagine. So I want to give people that opportunity to hear that song with his vocals way out front, so they can hear. Maybe, I don't know whether it would be with Dan muted even, so that way there's no confusion as to whose voice you're hearing. If you're hearing a voice, it's Gennady. So something that we would think about doing. And Vespers was created originally actually as a track for Gennady to improvise over. Basically, Vespers is a collection of things that are like atmospheric in like the same key and tempo as certain other moments in Let the Truth Speak. Sort of, it's all based on chord progressions in Let the Truth Speak and tempo and key. So that way, basically, I built Vespers the day before Gennady was going to record. So that way, because I was worried, he had never recorded with a rock band before. So I was worried he'd hear all the guitars and drums, and I thought it was possible that he might not know what to sing over Let the Truth Speak. So I created Vespers as like a backup failsafe, where it's like if it was too much going on for him to kind of latch onto, it gave him a track that was more ambient, like what he was used to singing over, and he could just sing things over that, and then we could put those things into the song Let the Truth Speak. And then one, he ended up improvising very well over Let the Truth Speak, and two, he ended up improvising very well over Vespers itself. And we're like, this is cool. Why don't we make this its own song as an intro to Let the Truth Speak? But yeah, Vespers was created originally just as like a safety track to help Gennady have something he'd be more comfortable singing over. It wasn't needed, but glad we did it.
Excellent.
Being a very cool thing.
Okay, I want to address the truth you are speaking about, or maybe give you my perception of it. I think for me, the experience of this album is about how beauty captured in art is a form of truth. The idea that enduring beauty found in art transcends time and speaks a universal truth, that beauty is not just superficial, it's intimately connected with truth and authenticity. It suggests that when we encounter something truly beautiful, it has a profound and timeless quality that touches on fundamental truths about the human experience, as opposed to transient and often deceptive nature of the human experience and knowledge. So how did you approach truth from an ethical point of view, or more of a philosophical word? What can you tell me about the truth of this record in relation to beauty?
Well, I think I would not take away anything from your interpretation of it, because I think it's definitely there. And in some ways that I think that is more, it's a very meta way of looking at the record, that almost like the process of making the record is trying to capture that beauty that you're talking about, that sort of perfect, pure, special artistic truth, and trying to find it and sort of honor it and pay some sort of homage to it. And I think if you ask, and you probably did you ask this question of Frank? I'm curious if Frank also
well,
this question.
Yeah, but I approach it differently, because he is accurate with giving the album title, or saying the word, at least on the press.
Right.
And I did mention to him the quote of this poem: "Truth is beauty, beauty is truth. That is all." Famous English poem, and we took them from there.
Yeah. So. I think if you asked Frank, me, and you haven't gotten to talk to Ben, Ben is who Frank was having the conversation with at the time when Let the Truth Speak was identified, they were the two of them. I think we were having a conversation after a concert we'd played in Montreal, and Frank said something about Let the Truth Speak, and it really stuck with Ben. And Ben is who brought it back forth as a potential album and song title. And anyway, I think if you asked Frank versus Ben versus me versus Ryan, that title would mean different things to each of us. I think for me, and I think especially it became this way after 2020 with the pandemic, I think it became even more the case where part of letting truth speak is admitting you don't know the truth when you don't know it. And I think we can kind of all be so eager to sort of fall in line with whatever tribe we're a part of, whether it's a political belief or a religious belief, a scientific belief, whatever community we're in, whatever we buy into, there's sort of this confirmation bias towards whatever community of people we implicitly trust. And then we sort of take that as our null hypothesis that that's just right. And anything agrees with it is proving truth. And anything that disagrees with it, we have to find a way to dismantle. And so I think for me, the album is a bit of a call to people to have some humility with regard to truth, but what if we're wrong as a title, I think very immediately gets at that, is this idea of there's a lot of things that humans over time have taken for granted. It's just like, well, this is obviously what it is, until you find out that it's not, like there's very many things in science that over many decades and centuries that we took as just gospel for ages, until suddenly it's like disproven. It's like, well, that thing we thought was just the way it was for hundreds of years is actually, nope, totally wrong. And so, having understandings that right now there are things that each of us probably just believes to our core is just the way the universe is, or the truth. And history says we're wrong about something massive. We don't know it yet. We're laughing at our ancestors. We're laughing at past generations of humans. We're laughing at each other. There's, people, on our planet who believe one thing so strongly and are just almost disgusted and disdainful at the stupidity of people who just don't see how obvious it is that it's one way, and then vice versa. And so, and they both can't be right, even though they're both equally sure they are. And there's a chance that both of them are wrong. And so, for me, I think especially with seeing where this album is very much inspired by mourning and fearing the trajectory that humanity is on, that this planet is on, and sort of the sadness and pain that comes with that, especially with feeling like, man, humanity can really, we're capable of being so great and being so special, yet we're also so destructive, both to ourselves, each other, and the universe and the world around us. And so sort of mourning the tragedy of the discrepancy between the beauty we're capable of and the wreckage we, as we execute it onto ourselves, onto each other, and onto the world around us. And so for me, I think that's a huge meaning of what the album is about. And Let the Truth Speak being a call to humans to say, hey, the only way we get off of this, wreckage path is to have that humility to, we don't know. And if you're just cocksure that what you're doing is the right thing, or that what you believe is correct, if everyone just continues out down that path, there's no getting off this path at that point. So, and there's a real existential angst about what that means for our futures, both as in our generation and future generations. And the legacy of our art won't mean anything if there's no people around to appreciate it. So I don't just mean our art, but I mean humanity's art. I don't know, there'll
Yeah,
be some species that comes along, hundreds of millions of years from now, and it's like, oh wow, that's kind of cute what these humans were doing, or whatever, these fossilized. Oh wow, they created this drawing in a cave. I don't know, but yeah, it's and something that Frank, I think, is really thinking about is where humanity's headed with regard to like artificial intelligence. What is that going to do as far as a sense of purpose and meaning of life? And that's a topic that I think for future creativity of where we're headed may be a direction of inspiration. So I think there's definitely, a truth in beauty, and a beauty in truth, as you said. And that is definitely part of it. And I don't know if we consciously wrote the album with the song's lyrics being about that in some way. I mean, I think All We Knew and Ever Loved, that title to me evokes a sense of mourning this beautiful thing that is going to be lost or has been lost. Something sacred that has been thrown away or has been left to die in some way. So I think that gets at what you're talking about. And I think the rest, maybe watching the earth sink also does in a certain way. That aspect of, again, the things that are beautiful just falling away and being left to.
Your definition of truth fits in the sentiment of the album, and also fits on the name of the band, Earthside. I don't know if that's conscious or not. At least that's how it spoke to me. And well, yeah, where I come from is that beauty is often an invitation into the transcendent, and also death is an invitation to transcend. So, if you speak about the earth sinking and the impending doom of humanity, there's also beauty in that, in embracing that, even though not from a hopeless point of view. Out of let's do the most with the time we have here. I have 3 final questions for you. Okay. One is also kind of reflection in terms of music and beauty and truth. There's this famous quote from a Spanish poet and a composer, Joaquin Sabina, saying that good music must have good lyrics, good music, good arrangements, and something else that no one knows what it is, but in the end is the only thing that matters. So Earthside, being a band that puts tremendous effort and time into creating good music, how would you define or grasp this ephemeral object that is the only thing that matters?
I think that is definitely a question that answering it would probably fall short of capturing it. And I think that's part of what the beauty of that question is, and that quote is, because if that composer knew what that something is, he would have identified it. And I think that's the point. It's that je ne sais quoi, as they say en français. But I mean, one thing I could say is inspiration, because I think that sense of a meaning and a purpose to it, where it's not just sound, it's not just words, it's not just that there's a yearning, there's something that's driving whoever's creating it to express something that then allows it to exist in the world. And so I think that ingredient of inspiration behind it, where there's an earnestness and an authenticity, where somebody was driven to do it, as opposed to, I owe somebody a song today to be on this album, and I'm just gonna do it because I need, the label needs another song, or my bandmates told me they need me to write a single or something. When somebody's driven to express themselves by life circumstances, by something they've heard or read or experienced that they just in that moment find themselves needing to create. I think that necessity, that desire, that drive in the creator, I think is a magical ingredient at times. I think when it's a band together creating, I think that ingredient might be the synergy of the moment of just 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 people jamming together in one moment, and just somehow, while each person is independently making their own decisions, without anything close to perfect knowledge of what the other person's going to do, just kind of that dance of being on the same page with each other and kind of building something together, and each being proactive and reactive to each other, and what sort of sort of emerges from that dance, so to speak. I think that's a certain magic to it. So I think depending on the process, what that ingredient is something different, whether it's an individual composer being inspired, or a band being collectively in the moment together, creating and building and having that curiosity in that moment of play with each other. But I would say that that's probably the ingredient, if I could identify it.
Perfect. Maybe for me, the quest of good music is what makes it special, but I'm only a fan, an aficionado. Okay, why do you think this music, Earthside music, has resonated so strongly with prog fans, even though it doesn't have the usual structure or ingredients, being complex in itself? Why do you think prog fans celebrate so much Earthside?
What do you think of as the usual ingredients that are different in that case?
Well, as I am used to, is more about the horizontal way instead of the vertical aspect.
It's like more like time signatures and bands.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the way that we talk about it in Earthside is we kind of think of prog as almost having 2 subsets. There's like bands that are prog, and then there's bands that are progressive. And what I mean by that is a prog band is kind of a band that more has the prog sound. They're influenced by Dream Theater, or they're inspired by Genesis or King Crimson or Yes or Rush or whatever it was, that they're kind of the natural ancestors of that sound. Maybe they've modernized it, but it's kind of coming from that same idea of, fusing rock and jazz and having time signatures and being virtuosic, and and then modern day examples of that might, Haken, I guess, would be an example of that sort of prog band as I think of it.
I mean, let me just say, prog is often used in a trendy manner. If a band sets a mood for an audience, others try to emulate. And nowadays, Haken, even the gent era of prog, has been kind of restrained in a way of emulate such sounds. But Earthside doesn't feel guided for such notions of prog.
Yeah. So I mean, where I was going with that is I think of the other kind of side of it as a band that maybe isn't as inspired by the prog sound, but they're more progressive as an adjective. So I think like when King Crimson came out, there weren't prog bands that they were emulating. They were blending a bunch of different influences in a way that was more musically advanced and adventurous. And it was just a blending of whatever their influences and emotions were at that time. And I think for us, we arrive at a progressive sound, a sound that is progressive by virtue of influences from, film scores, world music, new metal, like alt metal, new metal, like, Linkin Park, Seven Dust, funk and soul, like with Ben listening to Tower of Power and writing The Lesser Evil, new age music like Yanni, and trip hoppy kind of stuff like Bjork and Portishead, and more electronic-ish late 90s alt stuff like Moby. And you combine all those sound worlds together and you get something, and obviously our classical background with symphonic kind of stuff, which we also got out with the film scores. You bring all that together and you get a sound that is a inherently progressive sound because of all the different musical, you know, I don't want to say disciplines, but just traditions and styles. You know, there's all this rich diversity of sound in that is just organic and genuine to what the collective of us love. And so that we didn't, you know, set out to be a prog band. We have a progressive sound by virtue of what results from loving that combination of music and having pushed each other for years and having started with music at an early age. And yeah, it's just, this is what we love and this is what results from that. And I think, you know, like a band like Carnival, I think is another band where I would say they are more progressive than they are prog. It doesn't seem like they're a band where, you know, if you were to think about who Carnival's greatest influences are, I mean, I would guess Tool is one of them, but outside of that, I don't think there's a band that's probably labeled as a prog band that would be among Carnival's greatest influences. I think they have an interesting collection of influences in addition to having a great musicianship talent that results in a sound that has a progressive quality to it. You know, maybe similar to Leprous as well. I think maybe they're kind of in both worlds a little bit. Whereas I think, you know, and I mentioned a band like Haken, you know, it does sound like they grew up listening to a lot of Dream Theater. I don't know for sure, but I would guess they did. It does sound like somebody in that band maybe really loved their parents' Yes records or Rush records, you know. So that's where I think that feels more like they're carrying on a modernization of the prog sound, and that's more that sort of side of prog. And then Earthside or Carnival is more progressive bands as far as the word progressive and what it literally means, as far as looking for something to move music forward that doesn't happen to be inspired by really the prog bands that came before, so much as it's a product of a more modern equivalent of probably what inspired the original prog bands, is because there was no prog for them to emulate. It was the combination of the rock that they loved of that day, you know, in combination with whether it be jazz or classical or some other kind of music that that individual band found more interesting. So as far as the fans, you know, I can't speak to that. I mean, I do think progressive music fans and prog music fans, you know, I'm treating them as if they're two different things. But I think something that they have in common is, one, they really love music. These are people who care about music more than almost anyone on earth. And a lot of them are musicians themselves, or if they're not, they're certainly sophisticated listeners who put a lot of time and pride into. It's kind of like the equivalent of an art curator or an art patron who really has taken the time to really study and understand all these details of these paintings or sculptures, where they really know it inside and out. And so whether it's those intricacies of virtuosic playing or those intricacies of compositional details, to the extent that somebody has an ear where they really hear and really take the time to delve into music on that deeper level, where they're really noticing, it's that mindfulness of taking time to notice things about music and listen without distraction, and not viewing music as a commodity to sort of be the playlist of the background. You know, there's music to sleep to, music to work out to, music to dance to at the club. That's generally not how the prog listener sees music. So I think within the prog fan spectrum, there's, I think, a spectrum to people who are more analytical, more sort of hyper rational, versus kind of more emotion driven. Mm-hmm. I think our music probably appeals, especially with the verticality and the intensity, probably appeals more to the emotion driven person. But within that progressive music spectrum, I think the uniting thing is that deeply caring about music, and that really paying attention and noticing details, and whether it's details in the playing, the composition, the production, but really taking the time to absorb and know as much about it as they can. That a lot of it's just really caring about it and really just giving a damn. I think that's in some ways, and that's a part of the identity of the progressive music listener. So I think our music gives a person with that identity a lot to work with. And I think, our especially Let the Truth Speak album, I think is different from, I don't know if there's an album that's similar to it, but I haven't come across it. So I think it also gives people a new experience. I mean, new experiences are hard to come by these days. So,
I will defend that Earthside captures emotion very uniquely. No one on Earth has that emotion captured. I suggest to Frank two names. One on the rap side of music, because he mentioned that he's a fan of rap, and the second one that you mentioned that you were not as impressed by. I want to recommend you two names that I think this year are unique debuts of progressive music. One is The Anchoret from Canada, and the other one is coming next this month is Helga from Sweden and UK. I will send you the links. But other than that, what names could you offer to the audience of artists that have impressed you recently?
Well, really quickly, what was the first one you said? Anchor? How do you spell it?
D ANCHORET.
Okay, got it. I don't think I'm familiar with either of these bands. I'll be curious to check them
Are
out.
debuts.
Okay. And the band you alluded to when you said I'm not as impressed, I'm very impressed with aspects of that band.
Okay.
So I feel like they have they have a level up they can go to that if they make certain decisions, that band, who we will not name in this, well, I don't know. Yeah, it's no, I mean I think they're on the verge of something potentially very special. So I view my views as overall complimentary.
Perfect.
So, and I don't know if you've gotten the sense of this, but Frank and I and Ben, the three of us are a bunch of snobs. So we're sweet, nice snobs, but I do think we're hard to impress. I think it is true,
as usual.
We have a hard time impressing each other. Oh my god, it's impossible to write a song that like Frank thinks is good. It's like when I finally do, I'm like, thank God. And I'm sure Frank feels the same way. Like, what is it going to take for Jamie to have the same excited reaction he had when we were 10 and I played a D minor chord and he thought it was the coolest thing in the world? It's so that threshold of getting there is harder. As far as music, are you wanting me to answer that question or?
Yes, but so there is a quest between the members to impress each other.
To impress, it maybe isn't even the right word, but like to get that emotional reaction and response, that same kind of, when we were kids and we were discovering music together, it would happen almost daily where one of us would stumble upon something, the other one would be like, holy shit, that's sick, or whoa, how'd you do that, or whoa, what's that, and influencing each other constantly and pushing each other. And now we've heard each other do so many different things that I think it's harder to have that new experience. I know what a Frank song sounds like, so it's harder for Frank to create something that gives me a new experience. Frank knows what a Jamie song sounds like. It's harder for me to give Frank something that makes him feel something he hasn't felt before. And I think if we can give each other that feeling, I think it makes us feel like we're going to give the listener that feeling, because it's so hard to give each other that feeling of this is something unique, and something unique even relative to something I've ever heard you do before, that on that personal level. As far as your question, as far as music that I've heard relatively recently that I really love, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I mean, I do really love the new Tesseract album. I'm not usually the hugest Tesseract fan in the world, but I really am. I really do like the War of Being album. I think this to me is them at their best for me. especially I think it's Dan Tompkins at his best. I think he is the song Legion is like, oh my god, his emotion,
Yeah.
the way he just expresses himself emotionally on that song. To me, I think it's the most potent and powerful he's ever sounded in that way. There's a real urgency to it, a real beauty to it. I mean, this is a little bit of a biased take, but our guest vocalist Ketra, she has an unreleased album and she has a song also. She was in a band in Canada called Heavy Medicine Band, and if you just YouTube Heavy Medicine Band, there's this live performance on this Rogers TV YouTube channel, which is how we discovered her. And I just think that performance is so beautiful and so, it's been a long time. His music has made me feel that way, and that's why we're so lucky to have gotten to work with her on something. And an artist that's I think had some success recently, an artist called Tamino. Do you know the artist Tamino? I think he's from Belgium, but he's a Belgian Egyptian artist.
Tamino.
Tamino, Tamino.
Okay.
I don't really know his new album that well, but on his first album, there was a song called Habibi, Habibi, but I believe it means like darling.
Habibi.
It's
Okay.
I think it's darling in Arabic, and it's just this gorgeous song, and I think if you hear it, you'll feel like you're listening to something you haven't heard before.
Excellent.
It's a unique experience.
Okay.
What have I been listening to recently? Because I was asked this question on a recent interview, but I gave a biased answer because it was for Guitar World, and so I wanted to give at least some that are more guitar driven. I mean, one thing that's not even new music at all, but it took me until only in the last couple of years that I discovered the late 60s and early 70s folk artist, a guy named Nick Drake. Are you familiar at all with Nick Drake?
No.
So I don't normally like 60s or early 70s music. I never would have thought that something of that era would be among my favorites, but it like feels like it's coming straight out of the 90s, but 25 years earlier. I don't know how, it's almost like I don't believe it. I'm like, all right, there's no way a guy wrote that in 1969. Are you kidding me? No way.
Nick Drake?
Nick Drake.
Okay.
And the song specifically is called Riverman, is the song that I think I feel this way the most about. It just because there's something about it that kind of has this darkness that's kind of akin to like Alice in Chains' Jar of Flies, but he's a late 60s folk artist, and his vocals don't sound anything like Lane Staley. It's a much more understated folky style vocal, but just more that same sort of Seattle dark mood, but in a late 60s folk artist, which is interesting.
It sounds
special.
interesting. Okay, I know I said I have one question left, but now that you spoke about this, would you say that it's important for an artist as he grows as a musician to also evolve as a listener, to keep being open to new offers of music and ideas?
Well, I think if you don't, you're gonna stagnate as a creator. And I think for me, it's harder than it used to be to find that new music that really pushes me, because the more music that's out there that you've heard, then the harder it is to find that combination of notes or that combination of sounds that makes you feel something unlike anything you've felt before, or that you hear that sounds unlike anything you've heard before. So I think there's still a quest to find that thing that pushes me. I think I have to try harder to go outside of certain genres or outside of the comfort zone to find that new experience, because going to the well of my favorite bands is less likely to do it. So I would say, at least for me personally, I actively try, but I find it harder and harder to do. But yeah, I do think in order for a creator to continue to surprise themselves and inspire themselves, I think one of the best ways to do that is hear new music that is a new experience for them, that then inspires them creatively. And I was really quickly just looking at I have a playlist for sort of my all-time favorite music because I want to see what my most recent additions to this were, because based on that I might remember something like, oh yeah, of course I should have said this as an artist that I listened to recently that I think is really special. A rock band, metal band, prog band that I don't listen to a ton of prog these days, but in that world, and a band that, this band isn't necessarily strictly in the prog world, but I think they're prog-ish. There's a band called Palm Reader. The band Palm Reader, and they have an album called I think it's called Sleepless, I want to say. Did I have that right? Yeah. And I think on at least one of the songs, if not multiple, the keyboardist from the Contortionist plays on it. But for my taste, this is more up my alley than the Contortionist is.
Whoa.
So, yeah, it's an interesting band. It's, they're in a genre that because they're kind of in that like almost like metalcore, post-hardcore world a little bit. And I don't tend to love band. I like some bands in that genre. I don't tend to love bands, but there's something about Palm Reader that's just very unique to me, and I don't know how to describe it, but I just think it's it's
okay,
special and does something. An artist I discovered on Spotify in the last handful of years that I guess was like around like 20 plus years ago, but I didn't know about, was an artist called Boards of Canada. Do you know that? Do you know that band, Boards of Canada?
Ambient post rock, something like that.
Yeah, and I think they're really cool. They have at least a few songs that I've heard that I thought, I was like, ooh, haven't heard any. It gave me that new experience that I've been striving to seek out.
In the case of Frank, he mentioned Radiohead. It's his recent discovery, and that's fair too.
For me too. I mean, Radiohead and Bjork would be the other one. Maybe for me, maybe even Bjork more so than Radiohead, as far as, and this, I don't think it's that recent for us, I think, but it's relative to how long, like I think it's since A Dream in Static, Frank and I both got more into Radiohead and more into Bjork in ways that when we were doing Let the Truth Speak, those influences started to come out more. Like, for me, my favorite Radiohead album is probably Moon-Shaped Pool, which came out after A Dream in Static, and hearing that album was really what made me fall in love with Radiohead. The song Daydreaming is one of my favorite songs of all time. I think the song is just magnificently beautiful. And for Bjork,
okay, before,
go ahead.
No, sorry, there's a bit of a delay, and I thought you were finished, but continue, please.
Okay. Well, yeah, with Bjork, I really, I love the song Yoga. I really love the instrumentation on the album Vespertine. I love her incredible vocal performance on the song Play Dead I don't think it's from a specific album, but it just like unbelievable, like sort of throaty, intense vocals. So yeah. And a classical piece I really love, I'll just throw this out there, is the last thing I discovered in the last few years. There's a composer named Arvo Pärt, P-A with an umlaut, R-T, and a piece called Fratres, F-R-A-T-R-E-S. It's like really beautiful, but kind of metal in its own way. I think it's from like the 1970s, but Fratres, F-R-A-T-R-E-S, just awesome piece of music. And in modern classical, like in the last year or two, there's a really cool composer named Andy Akiho, and this is actually composed for Sandbox Percussion, who plays on they play on our upcoming album, and they're the featured guest on our first track. But as far as somebody who really knows how to compose for Sandbox Percussion on a level that I could only dream of composing for them, this composer named Andy Akiho in the piece Seven Pillars, which I don't know if it won a Grammy or was nominated for a Grammy. It was definitely nominated. I don't remember if it won, but gives you an idea of how respected this piece is in the classical world. It's, unbelievable.
Okay, before we get to the last questions, I want to give you the name. Are you familiar with Lingua Ignota.
I don't know well, but I've heard the name for sure.
Okay, as you were talking about these things, Bjork and classical modern, she is maybe it's wrong to say this, but she is kind of a torture artist because she has suffered a lot. But his works
was she
of
the
music.
person whose partner, like, there was
Yeah.
like a controversy. Is it
Yeah.
the person from like the band Daughters or whatever? It
Yeah,
is?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's the one. But I would strongly recommend you to check her music. It's wonderful. Okay. The last question.
Link me your favorite Lingua Ignota tracks or videos when we get off the call.
Okay, sure.
I've definitely heard her name and been curious and wanted to check it out, but I don't think I've listened to any of her music, or I listened to one song and it wasn't the right first impression.
She has done different stuff, but it's on the dark side of music, almost theatric. Okay, if you could, I didn't ask you about the concept of the album, the lyrics, nothing like that, but if you could relate the ideas of this album, the images in your head, to another form of art or work that already exists, like a movie, a painting, a book, anything beyond music, which one would it be and why?
So you're saying like if I could let the truth speak, just sort of having it playing and then make it like the soundtrack to an existing.
Yeah, probably like that.
I don't know if I have my own personal answer to this question. I know that for, actual source of inspiration for the,
okay,
there's a painting. I think Frank even linked it to you. I think he said it in his interview. He mentioned the painting, the black paintings from Goya and Fight with Cudgels, Duelo de, I don't remember exactly what's called in Spanish, but that I think was a huge inspiration on All We Knew and Never Loved. But I think it is thematically an overarching mood board for the whole album. Even if it's more All We Knew and Never Loved than all the others. I don't know if Frank mentioned the film Melancholia as well.
It did.
But I'm very biased by things that my bandmates have already said, but it's because, they were what we talked about when we were creating it. So they were our reference points in a lot of ways. So I don't know if I have my own original answer for it. If I think about my favorite films or my favorite things from other media, I don't know if there's an authentic answer to that question. I mean, maybe the TV show Black Mirror has some aspect to it where there's because I think one thing where there's another connection that we haven't talked about where I do actually think it fits is Black Mirror every episode is different characters, different premise, different storyline, but there's this overarching feeling to the show. There's an ethos to the show. And I think that's kind of similar to us, where every song is almost like a different band. It's a different production. It's a different set of vocalists. It's a different set of instruments, but it has a connecting feeling. So in some ways, I do think like our album could be almost compared to like a season of Black Mirror, where there's this through line through it on some level, as far as there's this uniting aspect of sort of something unsettling, something about the way the world is headed, that connects it all, but it's all different characters, it's all different mechanisms through which the same feeling is expressed. So yeah, I do think in some ways our album is the musical equivalent of Black Mirror in that way. I'm glad you asked me that question, because I don't think I would ever had that answer before, and I'm glad I had the thought of that answer while
Interesting. Yeah, Black Mirror fits well. And since you mentioned Black Mirror, there's a British show called Years and Years, one series, mini series. And if in the topic of the album and the way the world is headed, maybe you should watch 6 episodes, but it's darker and realistic. Years and Years, it's called like that. Okay, well, we have reached the final on the interview. Thank you, Jamie, for being here. Thank you for the insight and the information. I'm sure people out there will appreciate your openness to describe your music and your process. Please, if you could have anything left to say to the audience, Mexican, Hispanic, English, all over the world, please.
First of all, muchísimas gracias.
Right.
I don't know if I can say mucho gusto at the end or if that was only at the beginning, but great to me. It was a great pleasure for me. So that is true. I think we're hugely appreciative of our Latin American audience, the Latin American audience for music in general. I just think there's a lot of passion and there's a real genuine, I don't know if anyone as much as Latin American community has that just appreciation level of not taking anything for granted and just whatever you can do to show up, they will, y'all will. And we haven't gotten to experience it firsthand because we haven't gotten to play a show in Latin America, but I just get this sense that there's this feeling of, if you're living near New York City, most bands are going to come near you. So there's a way that you don't appreciate it as much. I think that for people in a place like Latin American countries, I think when a band comes from far away to go there, it's a real event. And I think it's beautiful how you guys, go all out to, I don't know if it's still a thing, but in the last year or two in Mexico, there was like these dolls or these Mr. What is it called?
Oh yeah, Dr. Simi.
Dr. Simi, yeah. And, so all these Mexican fans making their own Dr. Simis. So I don't know if Dr. Simi will still be a thing when Earthside finally plays Mexico, but I think that some things like that are just so cool.
I'm sure there is one Dr. Simi waiting for you, and if Adriana is watching this, maybe she has one for the band waiting.
Is this Adriana Porras?
Yeah.
She's who first told me about Adi is who first told me about Dr. Simi, so she'll be happy that this is where she gets her shout out in the interview for sure.
Yeah. And the reason why we appreciate so much bands coming here is because we see it as maybe a one in a lifetime opportunity, because we don't have that opportunities often. And well, thank you again, Jamie, for your time. I hope that there's a future for Earthside here in Mexico and Argentina, Colombia, El Salvador. Yeah.
And I did actually want to add one more thing, which is appreciating you, Alfonso, for, you ask incredibly deep and poignant questions. I think you're somebody who's a kindred spirit who really, gets us. And when I talk about progressive music fans investing themselves fully into the music, I think you are that and then some.
Thank you, man.
With the questions you ask and just how deeply you delve into it on a technical level, emotional level, and just big picture. That doesn't go unnoticed. There's a reason why this interview I don't know if it'll ultimately be about 2 hours, but I think it's easy to get to that level because of the depth of your curiosity, which I think is a really beautiful thing, and it gives more meaning to what we do. It has meaning to ourselves, but as far as a meaning and a purpose outside of ourselves, it's someone like yourself who wants to unpack it on that level, who wants to go deep like that gives it that second life outside of just our own experience of it. So, however appreciative you are of us and our fellow musicians that make albums, you know, we're also very appreciative of you and people like you who make what we do mean something rather than just a vanity project for ourselves. And to, you know, when I talk about also, you know, Latin America and Latin American music, I also hope there can be more of a global stage for musicians and artists from Latin America to have more of an audience and more, you know, success in Europe and the US, that it's not just, you know, US and European artists coming to Latin America, but Latin American artists being able to have an impact in the US and Canada and Europe and all over the world. And so I'm hopeful that, you know, there's more that can be done to elevate, you know, the Latin American fans' experience of bands coming to you all, and something that can be done to elevate the Latin American artists' experience of being able to have that global experience that we're so lucky to have.
Okay, thank you. You can expect a 1 hour review from us, Luis, who already interviewed you before over email, and maybe some other members of our blog. This album is special, truly special. Just you can expect the best of the feedback out there.
This will be a video review?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, cool.
And maybe Frank could translate for you guys.
I'll understand it all. Mi español es magnífico.
Oh, fantastic. Well, maybe in the next chance we can talk on Spanish for all the Mexican and Latin American fans.
all we got in Spanish was the Taco Bell commercials. Yo quiero Taco Bell.
Fantastic, man. Well, Jamie, I appreciate your words, honestly. See you another time, hopefully. And yes. Have a good day and get well soon.
Absolutely. We'll send each other links right when we hang up.
Yeah.